The shopping mall hummed with the energy of a Saturday afternoon crowd. Parents tugged at their children's hands, teenagers loitered by the food court, and shop clerks bustled about, readying displays for the holiday rush. Amid the chaos, 6-year-old Lily Monroe twirled away from her parents, enchanted by the dazzling lights of the carousel in the center of the mall. James and Veronica Monroe, a polished couple whose fortunes had been built on tech investments and savvy business deals, barely noticed their daughter slipping away. They were locked in a discussion about whether to add another investment property to their growing portfolio. "I think we should strike while the market's hot," James said, scrolling through property listings on his phone. "Agreed," Veronica replied, but her tone was distracted. She glanced around and frowned. "Where's Lily?" The words were like a needle puncturing a balloon. James's head snapped up. The carousel's merry tune played mockingly in the distance as they scanned the crowd. Panic clawed at Veronica's chest as she spun in place. "Lily! Lily!" The next few minutes were a blur of shouting her name, running through the maze of shoppers, and questioning indifferent passers-by. But Lily was nowhere to be found. On the opposite end of the mall, 12-year-old Darnell Harper sat cross-legged on a bench, cradling a basketball he'd saved for months to buy. His dark brown skin glistened under the fluorescent lights, a sheen of sweat betraying the effort it had taken to dodge a group of older boys who wanted to take the ball from him. "Keep your head low, Darnell," his mother always said. "Ain't no trouble worth finding." He was trying to heed her advice when he noticed the little girl. She was tiny, with curly blonde hair tied in pigtails, wearing a pink coat that looked far too clean for this part of town. She wandered aimlessly, her blue eyes wide with fear as the crowd swept past her. Darnell hesitated. He had plans that involved shooting hoops at the nearby park until the streetlights flickered on, but something about the girl's lost expression tugged at him. He stood and approached cautiously. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The girl looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. I can't find my mommy and daddy." Darnell frowned. "What's their name? Can you tell me where you saw them last?" She shook her head and hiccuped. "Mommy said we were going to the toy store, but then I saw the horsies and—" Darnell nodded, piecing together her story. He knelt to her level. "All right, let's find a security guard. They'll know what to do." The girl clung to his hand as they weaved through the throngs of shoppers. The ball tucked under his arm bounced gently against his hip, a rhythmic reminder of the time slipping away. By the time James and Veronica reached mall security, they were frantic. An officer with a clipboard and a no-nonsense attitude took their report, but the Monroes could barely focus. Veronica's designer heels clicked nervously against the tile floor as James wrung his hands. "We should have been watching her," he muttered. "We'll find her," the officer assured them, though the weight of her own doubt shadowed her eyes. Just then, Darnell appeared, holding Lily's hand. The girl broke free and ran to her mother with a cry. Veronica dropped to her knees, clutching Lily to her chest as tears of relief streamed down her face. "Oh, my baby, thank God!" James pulled his wife and daughter into an embrace, his gratitude overwhelming. When he finally looked up, his gaze fell on Darnell. The boy shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do under the weight of the millionaire's intense scrutiny. "Did you—" James started, stepping forward. "I found her by the carousel," Darnell explained simply, his voice steady. "She looked scared, so I helped her." James opened his mouth to speak, but Veronica beat him to it. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Please, take this." Darnell's face flushed. "I didn't do it for money," he said, stepping back. He hesitated, then added, "Just watch her closer, okay?" With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the Monroes staring after him. That night, Back in their penthouse apartment overlooking the city, James couldn't shake the image of Darnell. The boy's humble demeanor and quiet determination stirred something in him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. The next morning, James made a call. "Get me the name of the boy who brought our daughter back," he said to his assistant. "I want to meet him." The morning sun spilled through the wide glass windows of the Monroe penthouse, casting a golden glow over the marble floors. James sat at the dining table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, while Veronica paced back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand privacy policies, but this is different," Veronica said sharply. "That boy found our daughter. Surely you can make an exception." James watched her with a mixture of admiration and frustration. His wife's tenacity was one of the reasons they'd built their empire, but in moments like this, it could border on impatience. After a few more minutes of negotiation, Veronica hung up, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The mall security team refused to give me his name or contact information. Something about protecting minors." James took a sip of his coffee and leaned back in his chair. "Then we'll go back to the mall and find him ourselves." Across town, Darnell Harper's morning was far less glamorous. The Harper apartment, a small unit on the second floor of an aging brick building, was alive with activity. The smell of sizzling bacon and pancakes wafted through the air as Darnell's mom, Rochelle, cooked breakfast while humming an old gospel tune. "Darnell," Rochelle called, "come set the table before your sister eats everything off the stove." "Coming, Ma," Darnell replied, bounding out of his small room. His basketball was already in his hands, a constant companion he refused to leave behind. As he grabbed plates from the cabinet, his 8-year-old sister Keisha snickered from her spot at the kitchen table. "You still going on about that mall thing yesterday?" "I'm not going on about it," Darnell replied, rolling his eyes. "I just did what anyone would have done." "Yeah, right. You're a hero now," Keisha teased, grinning. "Maybe they'll put your face on a cereal box." "Keisha, leave your brother alone," Rochelle said, though there was a trace of a smile on her face. "What he did was a good thing. You should be proud." Darnell shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He'd just been in the right place at the right time. Later that day, James and Veronica returned to the mall. They started at the security office, hoping someone might recognize the boy from the previous day. The officer on duty, a stout man with a clipboard, frowned as they described him. "Dark-skinned kid, about 12, carrying a basketball," he said, rubbing his chin. "I remember him. Seemed like a good kid. He didn't leave a name, though." Veronica sighed in frustration. "Is there any way to track him down? He has to come here often." The officer shrugged. "Sorry, ma'am. I wish I could help more." As they stepped out of the security office, James caught sight of a familiar figure near the food court. His heart skipped a beat. There, standing by the soda fountain, was Darnell, basketball in hand. "There he is," James said, pointing. Without waiting for Veronica, he strode across the bustling mall. Darnell was in the middle of deciding between a root beer and a cola when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see the man from the day before, the girl's dad. "Oh, hey," Darnell said, unsure of what to do. Is your daughter okay?" "She's fine," James replied, his voice warm. "Thanks to you." Veronica arrived moments later, her smile radiant. "We've been looking for you. We wanted to thank you properly." Darnell looked from James to Veronica, confused. "I told you I don't need any money, It's not about money," James interrupted. "You did something extraordinary. Most people wouldn't have stopped to help. You deserve recognition." Darnell shuffled his feet. "I just did what my mom taught me. Help people if you can." James and Veronica exchanged a glance, their admiration for the boy growing. Veronica crouched to his level, her tone gentle. We don't just want to thank you. We want to help you. Is there anything you need? Anything at all? Darnell hesitated. He thought of his mom working double shifts to make ends meet, of the basketball court near his building that was more cracks than pavement, and of the second-hand sneakers he wore, their soles worn thin. But he shook his head. We're okay. James crouched beside his wife, determination in his eyes. What about your dreams? What do you want to do when you grow up? Darnell blinked at the question. No one had ever asked him that before. I want to play basketball, he admitted. For the NBA, Veronica's smile widened. That's a great dream. What if we could help you get there? Darnell frowned. How? James stood, his mind already racing with possibilities. We'll figure something out. But first, I'd like to meet your family. They must be proud of you. Darnell hesitated again. The Harpers didn't exactly live in the kind of place people like the Monroes visited, but something about James's earnestness made him nod. Okay, Darnell said quietly. I'll take you to my mom. The journey to the Harper apartment was an eye-opener for James and Veronica. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to the luxury they were accustomed to. As they climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor, Veronica clutched her purse a little tighter, though she felt a pang of guilt for doing so. When Rochelle opened the door, her surprise was immediate. Standing before her were two impeccably dressed strangers, their expressions both curious and kind. Behind them was her son, looking sheepish. Ma, these are Lily's parents, Darnell explained. The girl I told you about. Rochelle wiped her hands on her apron and invited them in, her motherly instincts overriding her skepticism. Please, come in. It's not much, but you're welcome. As they sat on the worn but tidy couch, James explained why they'd come. Rochelle listened quietly, her eyes occasionally flicking to her son, pride and protectiveness warring within her. When James finished, Rochelle folded her hands in her lap. I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Monroe, but we don't take handouts. It's not a handout, James replied. It's an opportunity. Your son has potential, and we want to help him reach it. Rochelle studied him, her eyes sharp. Why? What's in it for you? James hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. Yesterday, I almost lost my daughter. I don't know what I'd have done if your son hadn't been there. Helping him feels like the least I can do. Rochelle softened, her gaze shifting to Darnell. She saw the hope in his eyes, a spark she hadn't seen in years. After a long moment, she nodded. All right, but only if Darnell agrees. Darnell looked at his mom, then at the Monroes. His heart thumped in his chest as he nodded. Okay. The days following the Monroes' visit to the Harper apartment were a whirlwind. True to their word, James and Veronica wasted no time setting plans in motion. But as their worlds began to intertwine, it became clear that merging their lives would not be as simple as writing a check. Darnell sat at the kitchen table, a glossy brochure spread out in front of him. It was for Horizon Academy, a private school known for its rigorous academics and state-of-the-art athletic programs. James had sent the brochure over with a note scrawled in elegant handwriting. This could be the start of something great. You really think I could go here? Darnell asked, glancing at his mom. Rochelle stirred a pot of stew on the stove, her back to him. It's a nice thought, but we can't afford no private school. Mr. Monroe said he'd cover it, Darnell said hesitantly, his fingers tracing the image of the school's pristine basketball court. He said it'd be a scholarship. Rochelle turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Ain't nothing in this world free, baby. You remember that. But if you want this, we'll figure it out. Her voice softened as she walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. Just promise me you won't forget where you come from. This family don't have much, but we've always had each other. I won't, Ma, Darnell promised. He didn't know how to explain the feeling inside him, a mix of hope and fear, like standing on the edge of a diving board. At the Monroe estate, Veronica was busy finalizing details with the school's admissions office. Seated in her sunlit home office, she spoke with the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. "Yes, he's an exceptional young man," she said into the phone, glancing at the notes James had prepared. "And he'll be a valuable addition to your community. We'll handle all the financials." As the call ended, James entered the room, his brow furrowed. "Do you think he'll adjust?" he asked, sitting across from her. "A place like Horizon is a world away from where he's grown up." Veronica leaned back in her chair, considering. "That's exactly why he needs it. He has potential, James. But potential needs opportunity." James nodded, though he couldn't shake a nagging feeling. He had grown up in a working-class neighborhood himself, and he knew the chasm between privilege and struggle wasn't easy to cross. Darnell's first day at Horizon Academy felt like stepping onto another planet. The school was enormous, its hallways lined with gleaming lockers and trophy cases that showcased decades of excellence. Students in crisp uniforms moved confidently through the halls, their laughter echoing off the polished floors. "Hey, new kid," a boy called, jogging over. He was tall and lanky, with sandy hair and an easy grin. "You lost?" Darnell clutched his schedule, feeling out of place in his second-hand sneakers and ill-fitting blazer. Kinda. I'm looking for room 203. "Biology," the boy said, nodding. "I'm headed that way. I'm Ryan, by the way." "Darnell," he replied, relieved to have found a friendly face. As they walked, Ryan asked, "You play basketball? I saw you carrying that ball when you came in." "Yeah," Darnell said. "It's kinda my thing." Ryan grinned. "Cool. Tryouts are next week. You should come." Darnell nodded, but his stomach churned with nerves. He had spent countless hours practicing on cracked asphalt courts, but he had never faced the polished players of a school like Horizon. Back at home, the transition wasn't any easier. Keisha had grown resentful of the attention Darnell was receiving, and she didn't hide it well. "Look at Mr. Big Shot," she muttered, as he sat at the table one evening, flipping through a thick textbook. "Think you're better than us now?" "Keisha," Rochelle warned, but her daughter wasn't done. "He gets new clothes, new school, new everything. What do we get? Nothing." Darnell slammed the book shut, his voice rising. "I didn't ask for this, okay? I'm just trying to do something good for us, for all of us." "Stop it, both of you," Rochelle said firmly. She placed a hand on Darnell's shoulder. "Your sister doesn't mean it. She's just scared." "Scared of what?" Darnell asked, his anger deflating. "Of losing you," Rochelle said softly. "Change is hard for all of us." Darnell nodded, guilt gnawing at him. He hadn't thought about how his new opportunities might feel like a loss for his family. Hatanturbei. On the day of basketball tryouts, Darnell stood on the edge of the gleaming court, his heart pounding. The players were bigger, faster, and more confident than anyone he had ever faced. "All right, split into teams," the coach barked, clipboard in hand. "Show me what you've got." Darnell's first few plays were shaky. He missed an easy layup, and his passes were intercepted twice. Laughter rippled through the gym, and his face burned with embarrassment. "Shake it off," Ryan said, clapping him on the back. "You've got this." Taking a deep breath, Darnell focused. The next time he got the ball, he dribbled past two defenders and sank a clean shot from the free throw line. Confidence surged through him, and he began to play the way he knew he could. By the end of tryouts, the coach gave him a nod of approval. "You've got talent, Harper. Keep working, and you'll go far." That evening, Darnell returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. He found Rochelle waiting for him in the living room, her hands folded in her lap. "How was it?" she asked. "I made the team," he said, unable to keep the pride out of his voice. Rochelle smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, baby. Just remember, this world you're stepping into, it's different. Don't let it change who you are." "I won't, Ma," Darnell promised, though he wasn't sure how he could keep that promise. Already, he could feel the pull of two worlds, one that demanded he stay true to his roots, and another that promised a future he had only dreamed of. For the next few weeks, Darnell's life became a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. By day, he attended classes at Horizon Academy, grappling with subjects far more advanced than what he was used to. By evening, he practiced on the basketball court, determined to prove himself worthy of his spot on the team. And by night, he returned home to a neighborhood that now felt both familiar and foreign. At Horizon Academy, Darnell quickly learned that being the new kid came with its own set of pressures. His basketball skills earned him respect on the court, but in the classroom, he struggled. Advanced algebra and literary analysis weren't things he'd encountered at his old school. "Mr. Harper, can you explain the symbolism in the second stanza?" his English teacher asked one afternoon, pointing to the poem displayed on the smart board. Darnell's mind went blank as the class turned to look at him. He glanced at the verse again, the words blurring together. It's about, like, feelings?" Snickers erupted around the room. The teacher's smile faltered, and she moved on to another student. After class, Ryan caught up with him. "Hey, don't let them get to you. Some of these kids think they're geniuses just 'cause their parents are rich." "It's not that," Darnell muttered, shoving his books into his bag. "I just don't belong here." Ryan frowned. "That's bull. You've got more grit than half these guys. You'll catch up." Darnell wanted to believe him, but the gnawing doubt in his chest didn't let up. At home, the tension with Keisha simmered just below the surface. She no longer taunted him outright, but her silence was worse. Rochelle noticed it too, though she said little. One evening, as Darnell worked on his homework at the kitchen table, Keisha walked in, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and hesitated at the door. "You know they're using you, right?" she said finally. Darnell looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The Monroes. They don't care about you. You're just some project to make them feel good about themselves." "That's not true," Darnell said, his voice rising. "They're helping me because they believe in me." Keisha scoffed. "Believe in you? Or believe in how you make them look?" Before Darnell could respond, she disappeared into her room, slamming the door behind her. On the court, however, Darnell found a rare solace. Basketball was the one place where he felt fully in control. His coaches praised his work ethic, and his teammates began to rely on him during scrimmages. One afternoon after practice, Coach Harris pulled him aside. "You've got a good head for the game, Harper," he said, "but you're raw. If you're serious about taking this further, you need to put in the extra work." "I'll do whatever it takes, Coach," Darnell replied earnestly. Harris nodded. "Good. There's a clinic coming up next weekend. Some college scouts usually drop by. I'll recommend you if you're interested." Darnell's heart leapt. "Yes, sir. Thank you." As the clinic approached, Darnell's schedule became even more grueling. Between classes, basketball, and trying to keep up with his family, he felt like he was being pulled in a dozen different directions. James and Veronica noticed his growing fatigue and stepped in to help. "You need to focus on your future, Darnell," Veronica said during one of their mentoring sessions. They had taken to meeting at a cozy cafe near Horizon Academy, where Veronica would help him with homework, while James shared life advice. "We can hire a tutor for you. Anything you need." Darnell hesitated. "I don't want to take more than you've already given me." James leaned forward, his expression serious. "This isn't about taking, Darnell. It's about building. You have a gift, and we want to see you use it." Darnell nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that every new opportunity came with an invisible weight. The day of the clinic arrived, and Darnell was ready. He spent hours the night before polishing his sneakers, studying playbooks, and visualizing himself on the court. At the clinic, he was surrounded by talented players from all over the city. The drills were intense, but Darnell held his own. By the time the scrimmages started, he was in the zone, sinking shots and making plays that caught the scouts' attention. Afterward, as players packed up, a tall man in a navy blazer approached him. "Darnell Harper?" "Yes, sir," Darnell replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm Coach Reynolds from Westfield University. You've got a solid game. Have you thought about playing at the college level?" Darnell blinked, his mind racing. I'd like to, sir, but I'm only in middle school." Reynolds chuckled. "Doesn't hurt to start thinking ahead. Keep working hard, and you'll have options. Here's my card." Darnell took the card, his fingers trembling. It felt like holding a golden ticket. That evening, Darnell shared the news with his family. Rochelle beamed with pride, but Keisha remained quiet, her expression unreadable. "That's amazing, baby," Rochelle said, pulling him into a hug. "You're going places." "Thanks, Ma," Darnell said, though he glanced at Keisha, hoping for some sign of approval. None came. Back at the Monroe estate, James and Veronica toasted to Darnell's success. "He's going to make it," James said, his voice filled with certainty. "That kid has the heart of a champion." Veronica smiled, but there was a trace of worry in her eyes. "I hope so, but we need to make sure he doesn't lose himself in the process." James raised his glass. "To Darnell Harper, a future star." But as Darnell lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him. The Monroes, his mom, his coach, even Keisha, all of them seemed to be counting on him to succeed. And while he wanted to rise to the occasion, he couldn't shake the question that lingered in the back of his mind. What if I fail? The days following the basketball clinic were a whirlwind of excitement and pressure. Darnell couldn't walk the halls of Horizon Academy without hearing someone mention his performance. His name began to carry weight, even among older players. But for every cheer of encouragement, there was a shadow of doubt creeping in. Expectations piled on faster than he could handle. At the Monroe estate, Veronica paced the living room while James sat on the couch, his laptop open. A glossy image of Darnell mid-dribble during the clinic filled the screen, accompanied by an article titled, "Rising Star, Darnell Harper Shines at Horizon Basketball Clinic." "He's getting attention already," Veronica said, her tone a mix of pride and concern. "That's good, right?" James leaned back, rubbing his temples. "It is, but it's a double-edged sword. The more attention he gets, the harder it'll be for him to stay grounded." Veronica sighed. "Maybe we should involve someone, mentors, counselors. He's still a kid, James." "I know," James said, shutting the laptop, "but he's also on the brink of something incredible. We just need to make sure he has the support to handle it." At school, the attention wasn't always positive. "Yo, Harper," a senior sneered, as Darnell passed him in the locker room. "Think you're big time now? College scouts and all?" Darnell shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Just doing my best, man." The senior smirked. "Well, don't get too comfortable. You might be the new flavor of the month, but that doesn't mean you've earned it." The words stung more than Darnell cared to admit. He gripped the straps of his backpack tightly as he walked away, his head low. At home, Darnell's relationship with Keisha hit a breaking point. One evening, he found her flipping through a magazine on the couch while Rochelle cooked dinner in the kitchen. "Hey, Keiki," he said cautiously, sitting down beside her. "I've got a game next week. You should come." She didn't look up. "Why? So I can watch you show off for your fancy friends?" "It's not like that," Darnell said, his frustration bubbling. "You're my sister. I want you there." Keisha snapped the magazine shut and stood, glaring at him. "You don't get it, do you? While you're out living some dream life, I'm stuck here. Nobody's coming to offer me scholarships or new clothes or anything. It's like I don't even matter." "That's not true," Darnell said, standing to face her. "I'm doing this for us, for the whole family." "Maybe," Keisha said, her voice trembling, "but it sure feels like you forgot where you came from." Before Darnell could respond, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. The Monroes, sensing Darnell's growing tension, invited him over for dinner that weekend. Their sprawling dining room felt as foreign to him as the first time he had stepped foot inside. "How are things at school?" Veronica asked as they ate. "Good," Darnell said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just good?" James pressed. "You've been getting rave reviews from your coaches." "That's more than good." Darnell hesitated. "It's just, there's a lot of pressure, you know? Feels like everyone's expecting me to be this perfect player." James leaned forward, his tone encouraging. "Pressure is part of success, Darnell. It's what separates the greats from the rest. You have to embrace it." "But it's not just basketball," Darnell admitted. "It's my family, school, everything. Sometimes I feel like I'm letting people down." Veronica reached out, placing a comforting hand on his. "You're not letting anyone down. You're doing the best you can, and that's enough." James nodded, though his expression was more serious. "Just remember, success comes with sacrifices, but those sacrifices pay off in the end." The week of the game arrived, and Darnell felt the pressure mounting. His first official game for Horizon Academy wasn't just a test of his skills, it was a chance to prove himself to his team, his family, and the Monroes. The gym was packed with students, parents, and scouts, the air buzzing with anticipation. As the game began, Darnell started strong. He scored early, weaving through defenders with ease, but as the game wore on, he began to feel the weight of the crowd's eyes. Every missed shot, every bad pass felt magnified. "Shake it off, Harper!" Coach Harris barked from the sidelines. Darnell nodded, but his confidence was waning. In the final moments of the game, with the score tied, the ball landed in his hands. He dribbled down the court, heart-pounding, and launched a three-pointer as the buzzer sounded. The ball hit the rim and bounced out. A collective groan swept through the gym. The opposing team erupted in cheers as Horizon players hung their heads. Darnell sat in the locker room after the game, his head in his hands. The sound of showers running and teammates muttering barely registered. "Hey," Ryan said, sitting down beside him. "It's just one game." Darnell shook his head. "It's not just a game. Everyone was counting on me, and I blew it." "Man, you're not going to win every time," Ryan said. "Even the best miss shots. What matters is how you bounce back." Darnell nodded, though the sting of failure lingered. And when he got home, Rochelle was waiting for him. She didn't say anything, just pulled him into a hug. "It's okay, baby," she said softly. "One game doesn't define you." Keisha, standing in the doorway of her room, finally broke her silence. "You tried. That's what matters." Darnell looked at her, surprised. "Thanks, Kiki. Don't get used to it," she said with a small smile, but the warmth in her voice was genuine. As Darnell lay in bed that night, he thought about everything: the game, his family, the Monroes, and the road ahead. Failure, he realized, wasn't the end. It was a chance to learn, to grow. And if he wanted to succeed, he couldn't let one missed shot hold him back. He clenched his fists, determination flaring in his chest. Tomorrow, he would get back to work, because while the weight of expectations was heavy, his resolve was heavier. The aftermath of Darnell's first game lingered like a shadow. His missed shot became the focal point of hallway whispers at Horizon Academy, and even the coaches seemed more reserved during practices. But what stung the most wasn't the disappointment of others. It was his own sense of failure. For the first time, the dream of making it to the NBA felt distant, like a flame flickering in the wind. So, but your Mao at Horizon, Darnell threw himself into training. After the regular practices, he stayed late, perfecting his form and studying game footage in the quiet of the empty gym. Ryan often joined him, offering tips and companionship. "Coach wasn't wrong," Ryan said one evening as they practiced free throws. "You're good, but you've got raw spots. Let's smooth them out." "Like what?" Darnell asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Your follow-through on threes, it's too stiff. And your defense? You gotta own your space. You're fast, but speed means nothing if they can push you around." Darnell nodded, absorbing the critique like a sponge. His gratitude for Ryan deepened. Someone who treated him as a teammate, not a rival. Back at the Harper apartment, the tension with Keisha had eased slightly after her small gesture of support, but there was still an unspoken barrier between them. One evening, as Darnell packed his bag for an early practice, Keisha lingered in the doorway. "Heading out again?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, zipping up his bag. "Coach said I need to improve my follow-through." She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "You're putting in all this work. You sure it's worth it?" Darnell paused, looking up at her. "I have to try, Kiki. It's not just for me. It's for all of us." Keisha's expression softened. "Just don't forget about us when you make it big, okay?" He smiled. "Never." Meanwhile, at the Monroe's home, James and Veronica were grappling with their own doubts about Darnell's journey. Over dinner, they discussed his recent struggles. "He's pushing himself hard," Veronica said, stirring her soup absent-mindedly. "I'm worried he's carrying too much." James nodded. "That's part of the process, though. No one gets anywhere without adversity." "But he's still a kid, James," Veronica countered. "What if we're pushing him too soon, too fast?" James leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Maybe we could do more to help him manage the pressure. What if we brought in a sports psychologist? Someone to guide him through this?" "That's a good idea," Veronica said. "But we need to make sure he knows we're here for him, not just for his basketball." A week later, Darnell received an invitation to the Monroe's house for dinner. When he arrived, he was greeted with smiles and warmth. Their home always felt like stepping into another world, sprawling and pristine, with a view of the city that seemed to stretch forever. Over dinner, James brought up the idea of the sports psychologist. "Darnell, we've been thinking about ways to support you," he said. "What do you think about talking to someone who's helped athletes manage stress and build mental toughness?" Darnell hesitated. "I don't know. Isn't that like, for people who can't handle things?" Veronica shook her head. "Not at all. Some of the best athletes in the world work with psychologists. It's about strengthening your mind, just like you strengthen your body." "All right," Darnell said cautiously. "I'll give it a try." The sessions began the following week. At first, Darnell was skeptical. The psychologist, Dr. Miller, was a soft-spoken woman who asked questions that made him uncomfortable. "How do you feel when you're on the court?" she asked during their first meeting. "Focused," Darnell said, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "But also scared, like I can't mess up." "Why do you think that is?" Darnell shrugged. "Because if I mess up, I let everyone down." Dr. Miller smiled gently. "And what if I told you that failure is part of growth? That it's okay to stumble as long as you keep moving forward?" "I guess." Darnell trailed off, unsure. They met weekly, and slowly, Darnell began to open up. He talked about the pressure from school, basketball, and even the gap he felt growing between him and his family. Dr. Miller helped him reframe his thoughts, teaching him to focus on the process rather than the outcome. Before dawned on the court, Darnell's hard work began to pay off. During a scrimmage one afternoon, he blocked a shot from a senior who had taunted him earlier. The gym erupted in cheers, and for the first time in weeks, Darnell felt a spark of confidence. "Nice block, Harper," Coach Harris called. Later, Ryan slapped him on the back. "Told you you'd get there." Darnell grinned. "Still a long way to go." "Yeah, but now you're moving in the right direction." At home, Darnell's growing confidence began to mend his relationship with Keisha. One evening, he surprised her with a small gift, a keychain shaped like a basketball. "What's this for?" she asked, examining it. "To remind you that you're part of this too," Darnell said. "No matter where I go, you and Ma are the reason I keep pushing." Keisha smiled, a real smile this time. "Thanks, Dee." Rochelle watched the exchange from the kitchen, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. Despite the challenges, her son was finding his way. As the weeks passed, Darnell began to find a rhythm. The balance between school, basketball, and family was still precarious, but he was learning to navigate it. His missed shot at the first game no longer haunted him. It became a lesson, a stepping stone toward improvement. During his next game, with the score tied and seconds on the clock, the ball landed in Darnell's hands. This time, he didn't hesitate. He dribbled, stepped back, and released the ball with perfect form. The buzzer sounded just as the ball swished through the net. The crowd erupted, and Darnell was swarmed by his teammates. Amid the chaos, he looked into the stands, where Rochelle and Keisha cheered louder than anyone else. For the first time, Darnell felt like he truly belonged, in both worlds. Darnell's game-winning shot didn't just secure a victory for his team, it also cemented his place as a rising star at Horizon Academy. Over the next few weeks, his name appeared in school newsletters, local sports blogs, and even the occasional tweet from scouts who had attended the game. The attention was exhilarating, but it also brought new complications. At Horizon, Darnell's popularity soared. Students who had barely acknowledged him before now sought him out in the hallways. Older players slapped him on the back, calling him Clutch Harper. Teachers showed more patience when he struggled in class, offering extra help or extensions on assignments. But not everyone was thrilled with Darnell's success. "Think you're big time now, huh?" one senior muttered during practice, bumping into Darnell as they scrimmaged. Darnell held his ground. "Just trying to play the game." "Yeah, well, don't let it go to your head," the senior shot back, his tone dripping with hostility. Ryan pulled Darnell aside after practice. "Don't let them get to you, man. Some people hate seeing others rise." Darnell nodded, but the tension lingered. Iskini. At home, the buzz around Darnell's name was met with mixed reactions. Rochelle was proud, her face lighting up whenever a neighbor mentioned her son's achievements. Keisha, however, struggled with the growing distance between them. One evening, as Darnell returned home from a late practice, he found Keisha sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, Kiki," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "What's up?" She didn't look up. "Nothing." Darnell sighed, sitting down beside her. "Look, I know I've been busy, but—" "Busy," Keisha interrupted, finally looking at him. "You're never here, Darnell. And when you are, it's like you're not really with us." "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising. "I'm doing all of this for us. For you. For Ma." "Are you?" Keisha challenged. "Or are you just doing it for yourself?" Her words hit harder than he expected, but before he could respond, she got up and disappeared into her room. At the Monroe's estate, Veronica noticed Darnell's growing tension during one of their mentoring sessions. They were seated in her sunlit study, working through a history assignment, but his mind was elsewhere. "Everything okay, Darnell?" she asked, setting her pen down. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just stuff with my sister. She thinks I'm forgetting about them." Veronica smiled gently. "It's hard, isn't it? Balancing everything." Darnell nodded. Yeah, it feels like no matter what I do, someone's upset. That's part of growing up, she said. You're stepping into a bigger world, and that comes with challenges. But don't forget, your family loves you. Sometimes, they just need reminders that you love them too. Her words stayed with him as he walked home that evening, the city lights reflecting off the damp pavement. He resolved to find a way to bridge the gap between his old life and his new opportunities. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a post-game interview for a local sports channel, Darnell was asked about his inspiration. "My family," he said without hesitation. "My mom, my sister. They're the reason I keep pushing. Everything I do is for them." The clip went viral among his classmates and community. The next day, Keisha found herself bombarded with messages from friends who had seen it. "Your brother's so cool," one text read. "Must feel amazing to have someone like that in your corner," said another. Keisha's initial reaction was annoyance, but as she re-watched the clip, she felt a flicker of pride. Maybe she had been too hard on him. Meanwhile, the Monroes faced their own challenges. James was approached by a sports agent who had caught wind of Darnell's talent. "This kid's got potential," the agent said during a lunch meeting. "I'm telling you, with the right guidance, he could go far. Endorsements, scholarships, you name it." James was intrigued but cautious. He's still just a kid. He's not ready for that kind of pressure. "That's exactly why he needs someone to manage it for him," the agent pressed. "You care about this boy, don't you? Don't let him miss his shot." James promised to think about it, but didn't mention the meeting to Darnell. He wasn't sure if it was the right time, or if it was his place. One weekend, Darnell decided to make good on his promise to reconnect with his family. He skipped an optional practice to spend the day with Rochelle and Keisha. They went to the park, played board games, and shared a home-cooked dinner. As they sat around the table, laughter filled the room for the first time in weeks. "This is nice," Rochelle said, her smile warm. "Feels like old times." Keisha nodded, her earlier resentment melting away. "Yeah, thanks, Dee." Darnell grinned. "Any time." But as much as Darnell tried to balance both worlds, the pressures continued to mount. The sports agent reached out directly, bypassing James and contacting the Harpers through Rochelle. The prospect of financial stability for her family was tempting, but she knew Darnell wasn't ready to make such decisions. "You need to focus on being a kid," she told him when he brought it up. "You'll have plenty of time for big decisions later." Darnell agreed, but a part of him wondered if turning the opportunity down was a mistake. The weight of everyone's expectations, his family, his coaches, the Monroes, felt heavier than ever. Ito saw that the next game brought new challenges. With the crowd roaring and the stakes high, Darnell found himself hesitating on the court, overthinking each play. His team still won, but his performance was lackluster. The coaches took notice, and so did the scouts. After the game, Coach Harris pulled him aside. "What's going on, Harper? You're holding back." "I'm just tired," Darnell admitted. "You've got talent, kid, but talent only gets you so far. You need to clear your head and remember why you're here." And that night, Darnell sat alone in his room, staring at the basketball on his desk. The fire that once fueled him felt dimmed, overshadowed by doubts and responsibilities. He thought of his family, the Monroes, his teammates, all the people counting on him. But for the first time, he asked himself, "What do I want?" The days following Darnell's underwhelming game were marked by reflection. For the first time, he allowed himself to step back from the whirlwind of basketball, school, and expectations. Instead of extra practices, he wandered through his old neighborhood, the familiar sights and sounds grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in months. One evening, as he sat on the stoop of his building, Rochelle joined him, handing him a cup of hot cocoa. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft. "Just thinking," Darnell replied, staring at the cracked pavement. "About everything." Rochelle nodded. "You've been carrying a lot, baby, but you don't have to do it alone. We're here for you." "I know," Darnell said, "but it feels like no matter what I do, someone's not happy. If I focus on basketball, I'm letting Keisha down. If I focus on school, I'm letting my team down. And if I mess up, I'm letting you down." Rochelle reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "Listen to me. The only person you need to make proud is yourself. We're proud of you no matter what. Always." Her words sank in deep, and for the first time in months, the weight on his chest eased. Chata Trananos at Horizon Academy, Darnell started making small changes. He asked his teachers for extra help with assignments and began studying with Ryan and a few classmates. Slowly, his confidence in the classroom grew. On the court, he returned to basics, focusing on his fundamentals rather than flashy plays. Coach Harris noticed the change and pulled him aside after practice. "You've been different lately," Harris said, in a good way. "Just trying to focus on what matters," Darnell replied. Harris grinned. "Good. Because I submitted your name for the All-State Youth Basketball Showcase. It's a big opportunity, but only if you're ready." Darnell's heart skipped a beat. The showcase was a chance to play in front of top-tier scouts, but instead of the overwhelming pressure he usually felt, he was excited. "I'll be ready, Coach," he said with quiet determination. Meanwhile, the Monroes were grappling with their own decision. James finally told Veronica about the sports agent's offer. "You should have told me sooner," Veronica said, her tone sharp. "I didn't want to overwhelm him," James replied. "He's already dealing with enough." Veronica sighed, her expression softening. "We need to be careful. Darnell's not just a project or an investment. He's a kid with a family, and they deserve a say." James nodded. "You're right. Let's talk to them. Together." The Monroes invited Rochelle and Darnell to their home for dinner. Keisha came along, hesitant but curious. The meal was warm and welcoming, but the conversation soon turned serious. "We wanted to talk to you about an opportunity for Darnell," James said, setting his fork down. "A sports agent approached me. He thinks Darnell has what it takes to go pro." Rochelle stiffened. "He's too young for all that." "I agree," Veronica said quickly. "But we think it's important to share this with you. The decision should be Darnell's, and yours." All eyes turned to Darnell, who took a deep breath. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me," he said, "but I'm not ready to think about going pro. Right now, I want to focus on school and my team." James smiled, nodding in approval. "That's a smart choice, Darnell." Keisha, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I think that's a good idea, too." She looked at Darnell, her expression soft. "We're proud of you, no matter what." And the night of the showcase arrived. The gym was packed with scouts, coaches, and spectators. The pressure was intense, but Darnell felt different this time. Calm, focused. He thought of his mom, Keisha, and even the Monroes, all cheering him on in their own way. When the game began, Darnell played with heart and precision. He didn't worry about impressing the scouts or making perfect plays. He simply played the game he loved. By the end of the night, Darnell had scored 22 points, grabbed 10 rebounds, and made a crucial steal that secured his team's win. The scouts took notice, but more importantly, so did his teammates. "You killed it out there, Harper," Ryan said, clapping him on the back. As Darnell left the gym, Rochelle and Keisha were waiting for him, their faces glowing with pride. The Monroes stood nearby, smiling warmly. "You did great, baby," Rochelle said, pulling him into a hug. Keisha smirked. "Guess you're not so bad after all." Darnell laughed, the weight he'd carried for so long finally lifting. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was okay with that. Epilogue. a balanced dream. In the months that followed, Darnell continued to excel both on and off the court. He earned a partial scholarship to Horizon Academy, easing the financial burden on his family. With the Monroe's guidance and his family's unwavering support, he found a balance between his two worlds. By the time Darnell graduated high school, he had multiple college offers and a clearer sense of who he was. He hadn't forgotten where he came from, his neighborhood, his family, or the challenges that shaped him. And he knew that wherever life took him, he would face it with resilience, heart, and gratitude. Because Darnell Harper wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. He was living it,